Hey, Doll, you still playing the numbers game? Chasing to several different food stores every week to pinch pennies? Kick the habit and go for value at Kroger. Kroger carries more famous brands in more sizes at more everyday low prices than almost any other store in town. And you get the extra bonus of top value stamps for all kinds of wonderful gifts. Kick the numbers game. Shop Kroger. You can't do as well anywhere else.
Meet us at Kroger Field!
Well, if you watched my top 10 video last week, I'll put it up right over here so you can see it. But if you watched that video last week, then you know that 2 of these deadbeats lost. So the UNCLELOU poll will be changing up quite a bit this week, change it up every week. But we're going to do things a little different today than what we've been doing, and I mentioned this last week too. Today's UNCLELOU top 10 poll is going to be a prediction of the playoff poll. The first college football playoff poll comes out on Tuesday. So when I put my top 10 up today, that's going to be a prediction of what I think the college football playoff committee is going to do with the top 10. Let's go. All right, real quick before we start, I want to address a couple of things from over the weekend. There was a couple of questions that I got asked a lot in the comments over this past weekend. Number one, why didn't I mention Michigan in yesterday's Season is Over video at the very end when I talked about who are the best teams right now in college football, and I talked about the best one-loss teams? That was an error on my part. I just left out Michigan. It was an accident. Obviously, if you've been listening to me and watching these shows over the past really the entire season and looking at these polls, then you know that I'm a believer in Michigan. I think they're a legitimate contender right now and one of the best one-loss teams. So that was just an error on my part yesterday when I just rattled off that list of teams that I thought were the best 6 or 7 teams or the best one-loss teams, whatever. A lot of people said, "Whoa, what about Michigan?" or no respect, or thought I was trying to diss or trash talk Michigan some kind of. That was an error on my part. And like I said, if you've been watching, you know I'm pretty high on Michigan. Number 2, everybody wanted to know about this. Well, where did I get this? I don't remember where I got that hat I wore. I've had that thing for probably 10 or 15 years, and I honestly have no idea where. I don't even remember if I bought it or it was a gift or what, so I wish I could help you on that, but I can't. And shout out to all the Patreon members, too, that joined us on Saturday for the I live streamed the first half of the Georgia-Florida game. I didn't actually show the game or whatever. I just did a live stream during the first half. You could see the game a little bit in the background, but I did a live stream during the first half of the game for the Patreon members, and you guys really seemed to enjoy it. And I read through the comments again yesterday because I didn't get a chance to see them all during the live stream. A lot of you guys wanted me to do more of that, so that's what I'm going to do. I really appreciate everybody that has taken the time and effort to join up on the Patreon page. So I'm going to do that again this week. I'm going to stream the first half of the Georgia-Kentucky game live on YouTube. It'll be a private unlisted video, and it'll work the same way as last week. I'll post a link over on the Patreon page, and all the Patreon members can go over there 10, 15, 20 minutes before the game starts. The link will be there. Click on the link, and you can watch the game along with Uncle Lou and see me go absolutely nuts and lose my mind at every little bitty thing that happens throughout the course of the game. If you want to join up on the Patreon page, there's a link in the description of this video and every video that I've posted over the last couple of months that will take you there. It's the link that says want to support the channel and win a jersey. Take you over to the Patreon page, get yourself signed up, join us on that live stream on Saturday. You get all kinds of other stuff too for joining up on the Patreon page. But anyway, let's get right into the top 10 now. All right, here we go. I'm going to put last week's poll up on the screen again. I'll leave it up the whole time so you can kind of see how the poll has changed from last week till this week. I'll run through last week's top 10 though. Number 10, UCF. Number 9, Florida. Number 8, Oklahoma. Number 7 was Texas. Number 6 was Georgia. Number 5 was LSU. Number 4 was Michigan. Number 3 was Notre Dame. Number 2 was Clemson. And number 1 was Bama. Like I mentioned in the beginning, a couple of those teams lost this past weekend, so obviously this poll's changing up a little bit. A couple of teams had pretty good wins. We'll see if they move up. And again, up to this point, I've been making this top 10 poll based on who I thought was the best 10 teams at the time based on week-to-week performance. I'm changing that up this week. This is a playoff predictor poll. So I'm going to attempt to rank these teams 10 to 1 in the same order that I think the playoff committee is going to rank them on Tuesday when that first playoff poll comes out. Let's start with some teams that were close to being in my top 10, or I think are going to be close to being in the playoff top 10, but not quite there yet, but have a possibility to move into the playoff top 10, if some teams ahead of them lose and they continue to win. These are in no particular order, but the following teams did not make my top 10, which I think will be the first playoff poll. Again, this is no particular order. Texas, Utah, Houston, Washington State, Kentucky.
Hey, Georgia! Meet us at Kroger Field!
Florida, and Penn State. I still think those are all pretty good teams. I think at some point down the road, based on who loses in front of them and how those teams finish out the season, that they could make it into the top 10 down the road. But not this week. All right, here we go. We're going to start with number 10. And I think the playoff poll is going to copy Uncle Lou and put Central Florida at number 10. I've had Central Florida at number 10 in my poll for the last month or so, and I've been telling you all along, I'm not ever moving Central Florida higher than 10. This is a playoff predictor poll, though, and I do think the playoff committee will reward Central Florida with a top 10 spot. It's possible the playoff committee puts them at 9. I'm going to stick with 10, though, because I have been saying all along I was going to leave them there. So Central Florida is going to be 10 in the first Uncle Lou playoff poll. They were off. They're 7-0. They were off this last week. They play Temple this week. I'll say something about that after I run through the top 10, if I can remember. All right, number 9, West Virginia, the Mountaineers. They're 6-1. Huge win over Baylor last week. Not that Baylor's a great team, but they dominated them. And if you're a West Virginia fan, you've kind of been waiting on this West Virginia team to show back up. It's been MIA for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Caught up with them on the road at Iowa State. But West Virginia's had a bad habit this year of sleepwalking through portions of games. There's another team in this top 10 that I've accused of that multiple times throughout this season, too. I'm not going to say their name or their initials, but it rhymes with UGA. But West Virginia 6-1, dominated Baylor. Big game this week for West Virginia. You know, I talked a lot about West Virginia getting caught maybe looking ahead to this Texas game. Turned out to be the other way around, didn't it? But West Virginia plays at Texas this coming week. I know Texas lost this past week, but they've got a win over Oklahoma. So they're sitting at just the 2 losses. Now, I think their playoff chances are done, but I do think Texas still has a legitimate shot at the Big 12 championship. One of Texas's losses is out of conference. So Texas has 1 conference loss. West Virginia has 1 conference loss. Oklahoma has 1 conference loss. West Virginia plays Texas this week, and then West Virginia plays Oklahoma at the end of the year. Of course, Texas and Oklahoma have already played. Some combination of those 3 teams is gonna play again in the Big 12 title game. That's down the road, though. But a big game this weekend in the Big 12 for West Virginia and Texas. Whoever loses this game, it's going to be hard for them to get back into the Big 12 title picture, in my mind. We'll see what happens. But I have West Virginia at number 9. Number 8, I have Ohio State this week. They're 7-1. They were off this past week after getting absolutely obliterated by Purdue. They ran a train on them there. Purdue still scoring touchdowns. Nick Bosa still sitting in his recliner smoking a cigar, checking draft grades. They play Nebraska this week. Nebraska, huge win this past weekend over something called Bethune-Cookman. Yeah, they went ahead and scheduled that game just so they could get them a win after starting off, 0-6 or 0-7 or whatever it was. Ohio State will rebound this week. I'm pretty sure I'll talk about that game when I do the top 25 preview on Wednesday. But Nebraska, not a good team this year. But Ohio State's going to have to impress some people after that performance against Purdue. That's just what happens when you get beat down like that. UJ was in a similar boat a couple of weeks ago. Oklahoma's been in that boat. All these one-loss teams have been in that boat, right? So we'll see how they look this week against Nebraska, but they should get the win. But this week, the Buckeyes are at number 8. That's where I think they'll be in the playoff poll on Tuesday. All right, number 7, we got Oklahoma, the Land Thieves. They're 7-1, right? Demolished Kansas State this past weekend, 51-14. They play on the road at Texas Tech. This week, their one loss, of course, it was to Texas in the Red River Shootout a couple of weeks ago. That game go to overtime. Can't remember if it went. I think it might have went to overtime. It was won or lost in the end. In any case, game starting to run together here. But again, everything I said about West Virginia, you can apply that to Oklahoma too. This is going to be a round robin these last 3 weeks between Texas, Oklahoma, and West Virginia to see who can survive and win some tiebreakers to make it into that Big 12 title game. Texas already has a leg up because they have a win over Oklahoma, okay? If Texas beats West Virginia this weekend, they're in the Big 12 title game. I don't see Texas losing another game if they beat West Virginia. So if Texas wins this week, they're probably in. Oklahoma would then have to beat West Virginia to get in. The Oklahoma-West Virginia game would basically be a Big 12 title game, playoff game, and it's the last week of the year. So you'd have West Virginia and Oklahoma playing in the last week with the winner meeting Texas in the Big 12 title game if it played out that way. But we'll see who wins this weekend between West Virginia and Texas. But it's going to be interesting. Big 12, not that exciting usually, but with the reemergence of Texas and West Virginia having a really good year, the ending of the season is going to be great to keep an eye on in the Big 12. But yeah, they play at Texas Tech this week, and they're 7 in the poll. I think that's where they'll be in the playoff poll on Tuesday and 2. Number 6, I have Georgia. I think I had them there last week too. They're 7-1. Big win over Florida this weekend, 36-17. Proved a lot of people wrong. Of course, Georgia showed up on the road at Baton Rouge a few weeks ago and laid a complete and total egg. Georgia fans wanted to believe it was an Auburn scenario from last year. I was one of them. I wanted to believe that too. It's hard to buy into that completely though. And yeah, you know, I acted confident. I mean, that's just what I do. But that was a nerve-wracking game, or a nerve-wracking week heading into that game. I couldn't be happier. Georgia came out and did exactly what they needed to do. They won this game. It wasn't close. They caused turnovers. They protected Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm had probably the best game. He had one of the best games of his entire career. I mean, he really, really played good. Let's give credit where credit is due. DeAndre Swift had his best game of the year. Isaac Nauta had his best game of the year. I mentioned the defense causing the turnovers. It was just it was the most complete game I've seen Georgia play this season, without question. So that's a good sign if you're a Georgia fan and you're wanting to believe that this Georgia team is anywhere close to what it was last year. Of course, they get blown out on the road at Auburn, get things turned around, and go on that run at the end of the year. That's what Georgia fans are hoping for this year. We'll see if it can continue, because they got another huge game this weekend on the road at Kentucky.
November 3rd. Again, gonna be at 3:30. I already know.
Kentucky fans loud for no reason at all. Makes no sense. I mean, that's great that they're 7-1. Their offense is terrible. I don't want to get ahead of myself here on the Kentucky thing. I try not to trash talk too much in these videos, but it's not always easy. But in any case, this will be a big game this Saturday, Georgia and Kentucky. The winner of that game wins the East. I mean, I don't know how more clear I can be. The winner of that game is going to be playing in Atlanta for the SEC title on the first Saturday in December. Huge game. But anyway, I've got Georgia at number 6, and I think that's where they'll be in the playoff poll on Tuesday. All right, top 5 time. And the first team out of the top 4, right, which is the most important when you're talking playoff polls, Michigan. Michigan has been an impressive team to me this year. They lost week 1, okay, to Notre Dame, which we'll get to in a minute. And every week that goes by, that loss to Notre Dame looks better and better and better and better and better, right? Michigan had a new quarterback. He didn't play well week 1. He's starting to come along now. Of course, their defense is absolutely lights out. They've gotten over their first hurdle this year, which in my opinion, with the Michigan State game, they still got Ohio State looming towards the end of the year. They play Penn State this weekend. Now, they were off last week, so they've gotten an extra week of rest and preparation time for this Penn State game, and they get them at home. This is a must-win game for Michigan. I mean, really, all of these teams that are 7-1 are in must-win territory now, right? No room for error at this point in the season. Too close to the end here. And if you're sitting at 1 loss, it's looking like it's going to be almost impossible for a 2-loss team to get into the playoff this year. So we'll see what happens with that. But Michigan hosts Penn State. Huge, huge game. They got to find a way to win that one. Penn State hasn't looked too good lately. Talk plenty about that game on Wednesday when I do the top 25 preview. But I think Michigan will be 5th when the playoff poll comes out on Tuesday. All right, and the playoff teams, if the season ended today, number 4, LSU, 7-1. They were off this past week, and of course, everyone knows they host Alabama this weekend. Their 1 loss was on the road at Florida. Other than that, they have really ran through their competition with little to no problem. I mean, you can't overestimate the importance of this next game, though, LSU and Bama. Season on the line, in my opinion, for both of these teams. I mentioned a minute ago, I don't think a two-loss team is getting into the playoffs this year. A non-division winner's not getting in either. They're just not. If Bama loses this game, they're out of the playoffs. It's that simple. Notre Dame has ruined any chances Alabama has of trying to sneak in the same way they did last year through the back door by not even winning their own division, which is embarrassing and sad, especially when you look at Nick Saban 2 years ago giving all those speeches and up on his standing on his stump yelling at the top of his lungs about how non-division winners shouldn't be in the playoffs. I just don't think a non-division winner is getting in this year. I don't think a two-loss team is getting in this year because of the way things are setting up and because of Notre Dame. So this is an elimination game for the SEC West, the SEC, and the playoffs, in my opinion. LSU and Alabama. You could say the same thing about Georgia and Kentucky. This is probably the two biggest games to take place in the SEC on the same weekend in a long, long time, this late in the season. Both of these are elimination games for the division, the conference, and the playoffs, in my opinion. That'll be a huge game, but I think when the playoff poll comes out on Tuesday, they'll have LSU at 4. LSU's got some pretty good wins. Of course, they beat Miami week 1. That win doesn't look so great now, but they demolished Georgia. And with the exception of Florida, they've ran through the rest of their schedule. LSU 7-1, I think they'll be 4th. 2 and 3, to me, was the hardest ones to do on this top 10 list. And I really don't have a very good explanation for why I'm putting 3 at 3 and 2 at 2. And if you want to tell me in the comment section that these should have been flipped around, I won't argue with you. Keep in mind, though, the way the playoffs work, 1 plays 4 and 2 plays 3. So in reality, it doesn't matter who's ranked 2nd or 3rd. You see what I'm saying? These teams would play each other if this was the final playoff poll. I'll do my best to explain it as we go along here. But at number 3, I have Clemson. They're 8-0. They absolutely destroyed Florida State in Tallahassee this weekend, 59-10. They play Louisville next week. And you're saying, well, there's nothing impressive about beating Florida State. They're a terrible team. That's a rivalry game. Florida State was talking a lot heading into that game. It was in Tallahassee, and Clemson absolutely beat them down. I don't know how many of you watched this game. If you're a Clemson fan or a Florida State fan, I'm sure you watched it. This was no, this was a beatdown of biblical proportions here. Florida State could do nothing offensively. Clemson had their way offensively. Lawrence had another 300 yards. What did he have, 3 or 4 touchdowns? Clemson ran the ball when they wanted to. Clemson's front 7. We knew going into this game Florida State would have no answer for Clemson's front, right? Florida State, one of the worst offensive lines in the Power 5. Clemson, probably the best defensive front 4 in the Power 5. Maybe Michigan has something to say about that. But in any case, Clemson's front 4 is elite. It's full of NFL players, and Clemson absolutely dominated Florida State 59-10. Louisville next week. I have them at 3. I think that's where they'll be on Tuesday. And I'll tell you why right now. Notre Dame at 2. I think Notre Dame's got some wins that the committee is going to give greater weight to than any win that Clemson has right now. I know Clemson has that win over NC State, but NC State had literally not played anybody heading into that Clemson game when they were undefeated. And you sort of saw that in the rankings, right? NC State was the lowest ranked undefeated Power 5 team. They were 5-0, 6-0, whatever it was, and they were 15th or 16th. Literally played nobody. Clemson demolished them. The win at Texas A&M, I'm not really sure how good of a win that is. I think Texas A&M is are they a top 25? I think they're borderline top 25, Texas A&M. He won on the road. So you get some credit for that, but it just wasn't a dominating win. I'm just trying to see what your best win is. Now, here's the thing, and I get this. You can't help it if the teams you play are bad. But if you blow them out, what else can you do? So like Florida State, you blow them out. The team, was it Boston College or Wake Forest, whoever it was, 63-3 a couple of weeks ago. Okay, great. Well, then you host Syracuse. You win by 1 score. The Texas A&M, you win by 1 score. So I'm not putting Clemson down. I'm just trying to justify why I have Notre Dame at 2 and Clemson at 3. Obviously, Clemson is an elite team and looks like a playoff team. Notre Dame's win over Michigan, in my opinion, is the best win right now of any of these top 4 teams. And I think the playoff committee is going to give a lot of weight to that win. They destroyed Stanford. They destroyed Virginia Tech. The Vandy game, that was before they switched quarterbacks. Now, I'm not making excuses, and I'm not sure what weight, if any weight at all, the playoff committee will give to the fact that they switched quarterbacks after the Vandy game. I have no idea. But if you've watched Notre Dame play, and listen, I don't like Notre Dame either, but there are a lot of people who just have blind hate for Notre Dame. Or they're overrated, they're not any good. And you say that every year, and you were proven right in 2012. And in 2012, I was saying the same thing. Notre Dame's got no business being in the national title game. You could watch them play and tell they weren't a top 4 or 5 team, but they got put in anyway. In my opinion, this year is not like 2012. From what I've seen from Notre Dame this year, I think they are a legitimate playoff contender this year. Do I think they have a chance to win the whole thing? Probably not. And I think Notre Dame would probably lose in the first round of a playoff right now, no matter who they played. But if you're looking at resume and what they've done and the things that the playoff committee is going to look at, I think right now they're going to give Notre Dame a little bit of a bump over Clemson. Now, the problem if you're Notre Dame is you have zero room for error because of the way this season is playing out. None. You don't have a conference championship game to fall back on. If Notre Dame drops a regular season game and finishes 11-1, they're probably still going to be in the top 4 the last week of November. But then that following weekend, when Alabama and Clemson and LSU and Michigan and Georgia and Oklahoma and Ohio State and West Virginia, whatever, there's going to be, there's 5 major conferences, so 10 teams are going to be playing in a conference championship game against a highly ranked team while Notre Dame is sitting at home on the couch, right? And the committee is going to have that last weekend to look at those 10 teams. If Notre Dame has that one loss and no conference championship game to fall back on, I think they'll end up 5th in the final playoff poll. So that's sort of a long, overdrawn, convoluted way of saying Notre Dame's got to go 12-0 if they want to get in the playoffs. It looks like they will. Look at their schedule. Southern Cal is probably the best team left on their schedule. Syracuse is not terrible, but can they compete with Notre Dame? Probably not. Northwestern, we'll see. You demolished Navy. So anyway, I've got Clemson 3, Notre Dame 2, and those are the reasons why I'm not knocking either team. Clemson obviously is a great team, but I'm trying to predict what the playoff committee is going to do here, and I think they're going to give some weight to that Notre Dame win over Michigan, more so than any one particular win that Clemson has. That's just how I see it right now. And of course, I think they'll have Alabama at number 1. I'm going to be honest with you. I thought about putting Notre Dame at number 1 in this poll just because of the strength of schedule and the wins that Notre Dame has versus any wins that Alabama has. What is Alabama's best win of the season right now? Texas A&M? I mean, I don't know. I'm asking. Somebody can tell me. I don't know. Now, obviously, none of that will matter after this next week because you're playing LSU, but the committee doesn't look forward and say, well, they're playing a good team later. So I thought about putting Notre Dame ahead of Bama, not because I think they should be, but because I wondered if maybe the playoff committee might really be that high on Notre Dame's wins. And in the end, I just said, no, I think they're going to give Bama the credit they deserve. They've blown out everybody they've played. So I've got Bama at number 1. They're 8-0. They're off this week, or were off last week. Of course, they play at LSU this Saturday. I talked about that when I mentioned LSU at number 4, so I'm not going to get into all that again. But I will have a whole lot to say about this Bama-LSU game in tomorrow's video when I do the SEC preview. But it's going to be a good one. Everyone will be watching. You know they will. It'll be a good game. LSU's fired up. Bama thinks they're going to win by 30. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I'll let you know tomorrow. LSU thinks they can win this game too. It's at LSU, so we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's definitely one of the biggest games of the year without question. All right, that's it. I appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Uncle Lou channel if you're not already. Thumbs up this video. That really helps a lot. I hate asking y'all to do that, but it just takes 2 seconds. Slap the thumbs up video. It really helps me out. I appreciate it. You guys have a great day. Live show today, 3 p.m. Eastern. Brag or cry. We do this live show every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Well, we do it every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. But Monday's show is the Brag or Cry edition. Georgia fans, Call up and brag. Rub it in Florida fans' face. Florida fan, don't hide. You called Uncle Lou last week. Call Uncle Lou this week. Tell me you were wrong. Tell me I was right. Admit that Georgia's better than Florida. Texas, I don't want you hiding either. Y'all can call in too. Take your medicine. But anyway, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you soon. Have a good morning.